Hi, I'm Suparna Gupta, and today I want to talk about domestic violence. Very specifically, what can the everyday change maker, the everyday activist do when you want to step up and step forward on behalf of somebody who's struggling with domestic violence? I'm brainstorming with Persis Sidhwa, who has been a women and child rights lawyer for the last decade and has literally worked on hundreds of cases. And I think the first thing, Persis, that we should talk about is the law, because India does have the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, the DV Act, as we call it. One just assumes when you hear about domestic violence that it's all about husbands and wives. But the fact is that our law includes children. You're saying it includes even relatives of a victim who might be threatened or attacked. It includes mothers and sisters who are living in a shared home, and as you just said, people who are not married but are in some kind of relationship. So that
Correct,
I think
correct.
that's
So women across religions and women across age. So even children are covered,
yeah.
and even younger boys would fall
The
into
other
that.
thing, Persis, I think that's important to understand about the law is that we sometimes, we associate domestic violence with physical and sexual violence. I think that's the more known aspect of it. But of course, the law is broader than that. So, will you talk a little bit about the other things it covers?
In 2005, when the DV Act came into being, for the first time, you had a comprehensive definition of domestic violence.
Hmm.
So, domestic violence is physical violence, of course. It's also mental abuse. It's also emotional abuse. It's also verbal abuse. So, you have so many cases, where women come and say, my husband just is constantly abusing me, using foul language,
Hmm.
mental abuse, body shaming, emotional abuse, constantly saying that you're not able to have a child, or you're not able to have a boy, or economic violence, economic abuse, where, the wife is not maintained. She constantly has to beg for money. Cases where women are working but have no access to their own earnings.
Yeah.
Cases where women, are given a pittance to run the house when he's actually earning really well. Children are denied education. Children are denied medical expenses. So it's physical, but it's also mental. It's also emotional. It's also verbal. It's also economic, and then sexual violence as well.
And
So
similarly, I think when you do report, therefore, the court order that you get is not just limited to, it's not just the punitive part of the perpetrator being punished or somebody being sent to jail, but it's actually, again, broader, and there are practical aspects that get covered for a woman who's complained. For instance, custody of children is something that you might get a
yes,
court order. Can you talk a little
yes.
bit about that?
When you look at the Domestic Violence Act, it's a civil law with criminal consequences. So when you speak to women who face domestic violence, their requirements are very tangible. And I think that is why the DV Act is so critical, because women will come and say, I want the violence to stop.
Hmm.
Women will say, I need the custody of my children. I have been thrown out of my matrimonial home. I've been thrown out of my shared household. I want to go back inside. So their requirements are very tangible. And that's where the Domestic Violence Act comes in. So, what the Domestic Violence Act does is that it provides them reliefs, and they can get a court order. So,
Hmm.
for example, you have a protection order that the domestic violence must stop. The court will pass an order directing the respondent, directing the perpetrator, that the violence must stop: physical, mental, emotional, verbal. Orders that, you cannot communicate with her, you cannot threaten her, you cannot threaten any of her family members or anyone who is assisting her. So, protection from the violence, which is sometimes the most important and basic ask of any woman. Then you have residence orders. So, the woman is thrown out of the house, or she's in the house but she's constantly being threatened, or the rent is not paid, or the EMI is not paid, or it's a company accommodation and he's constantly threatening, I'm going to quit my job, right? So orders for her to reside safely. She cannot be thrown out of the house. She has to be given permission to re-enter the house, pay EMI, pay rent. She cannot stay in the same place or in the same home. So pay rent for her in a separate accommodation that is as per your standard of living, as per your capacity. So securing her right to residence. Then, besides that, you also have monetary relief, which is maintenance. So, payment of household expenses, payment of her personal expenses, payment for the children, their education, their living expenses, their medical expenses. So, all of this will fall under monetary relief. Also, in husband wife relationships, very often you have cases where her stridhan, that is what has been given to her by her parents or by any family members from the husband's side or from her maternal side in the course of the marriage, is taken away from her, is not in her custody. So return her stridhan to her, right? Return her belongings to her, return her documents to her. And then custody, child custody in cases where it's a case of husband and wife, and compensation. So at the end of the case, the court can pass an order granting a certain amount as compensation to the wife in addition to the monetary relief that has been granted. So, in simple words, this is more like damages for the violence that she has faced. So, at the end of the case, an additional amount can be paid as compensation. So, it's a very relief based law, which gives a woman her right. And if these orders of the court are violated, there are criminal consequences. So, for example, if a father has been directed to pay X amount for his daughter's educational expenses and he defaults, the court will give him one opportunity, maybe a second opportunity, but then the court will take criminal action. There are criminal consequences. So his salary can be attached, a warrant can be issued, an arrest warrant can be issued, right? If a protection order has been violated, even an FIR can be registered. So it's civil in nature, but criminal consequences if the respondent does not abide by the court orders.
Court orders actually, it sort of makes one feel very hopeful about supporting a survivor. But I think it's not that easy to be an ally. It takes a while. And sometimes it's also not safe for a victim or a survivor to sort of act prematurely. So, Persis, I guess you'd agree that if one wants to support a survivor to report, then there's a certain preparation that we can help her with. For instance, making a plan. Where will you go? Is there a short-term need to change house? Do you have relatives? We can maybe, as a supporter, you can maybe advance her a loan. You can figure out if there's a way or a place to keep her children safe. And then before reporting, it's also important to know all the different ways in which one can report. So, of course, one can call 100 and call the police. The second, one can call the helpline. I think each state and each city has a different helpline. I've called the helpline for somebody in Mumbai, 103. It was very quick, impactful, and effective. There is 1098 Childline if children are involved. But there's also, one doesn't always have to complain to the police. So there are also, the law also introduces the protection officer. So Persis, will you talk a little bit about why you would go to a protection officer as opposed to going to the police, and how can one actually prepare and make sure that all these people are contactable before helping somebody to report?
So I think what really happened when the DV Act came into being in 2005 is that there was a very clear understanding that women's requirements were very tangible. I need a place to stay. I want to stay in a violence-free environment. I need maintenance for myself, for my children. And that is what the DV Act really, seeks to do, is to provide these tangible reliefs. But access to courts has always, access to justice, access to the system has always been difficult. And therefore, this idea of a protection officer who is a government officer And for example, in Maharashtra, you have protection officers at the taluka level. So it's not centralized at the district level. At the taluka level, you have protection officers. A woman can approach a protection officer and say that, I wish to access the DV
But
mode.
how can she approach? How can she approach him? Where will she find him? How can she call him?
So if you contact the district office, the Department of Women and Child Development, the district office, they will provide you the names of the protection officer. So based on where you stay, you will be provided with the name, number, and the location of the protection officer. So, for example, in Bombay, they're spread across the city in different locations. And based on where you stay, you can approach this protection officer, contact the district office. So that's something an ally can do to make the process seamless.
Mm-hmm.
Contact the district office, get the location, number of the protection officer, and then approach the protection officer.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of going to court was always, I have to go to a lawyer, I will have to invest that much money, that much time. There will be these long documents, legal documents that will be prepared. It'll be very time consuming. It'll be, it's definitely not cost effective. So the idea of this protection officer is someone who a woman can approach, who has been trained on how to handle cases of domestic violence. So the woman can approach him. There is a form that's a part of the DV Act that is known as the DIR, the Domestic Incidents Report. He has to fill this form out. Basic documents have to be attached. And then this form will be filed in court, and that begins the case.
And in your ground level experience, have you found this to be a practical route? Does it actually work at the ground level in the cases you've worked on?
So in the cases that I've worked on, I think in Mumbai, Thane, around Mumbai, surrounding areas, you do have protection officers. So protection officers are there. They've been sufficiently trained, so they understand that they have to fill this form. They understand that they have to submit these forms in court to initiate the case. But I think one thing that is slightly, I would say, lacking is the awareness of where is this protection officer and who is this protection officer.
So something that would be valuable to do for a survivor, if you're an ally, is to go and maybe take the time to find this person. Where is she? Can I call her? Where is he? Where is she? Where do they sit? Maybe, if possible, even call them and see if the phone works. Is it accessible? And maybe you can have some kind of a pre-conversation to prep them to say, if we come, how long would we have to wait? How long is the process? And so that might be something valuable that an ally can do as part of
Absolutely. One more thing the protection officer can help with is support services, right? Because in every district, in every community, there are organizations that are providing services. There are government schemes. So the idea is that the protection officer to connect this woman. So if she needs temporary shelter, as you were mentioning, connect her to the shelter. If she needs, further medical intervention, connect her to the local hospital. There are NGOs that are providing counseling services, vocational training, educational. So these support services, how do you connect her to these support services? And that's also a very crucial role of the protection officer. So not only filling this form and filing it in court,
but actually making those linkages. Yeah,
absolutely.
wow, that's very valuable. And finally, I think it can be very powerful and supportive to go with a victim or a survivor and help her to file a complaint when she's ready. Tell us what to expect at the police station. There are two kinds of reports that could be filed, and you should probably leave with a written copy of one or the other. That would be your sign. So will you tell us about that?
So I think when a woman or a survivor, a victim, an ally with her approaches the police station, in cases of domestic violence, broadly speaking, there would be two options. So one is that she can register an NC, a non-cognizable complaint. An NC is a simple one-page document where a particular incident is documented. So I have come to register an NC saying, this has happened to me on this particular date. It is documented in a couple of sentences. A copy is provided to the survivor. She signs on it. It's read out and explained to her before she signs. That's very critical. and then a copy is handed over to her free of cost. What does an NC do? An NC documents a particular incident or incidents. An NC is not a direct case. If the woman wants to make an NC into a case, she has to go to court, and there's an entire process for converting that NC into a full-fledged case. So ideally, what an NC does is, it's a form of evidence that this is the violence that she has faced on from her husband or from her father or whoever. Multiple NCs can be lodged. So the other option that a woman has at the police station is registration of an FIR. FIR is a first information report, and the FIR marks the beginning of the criminal case. So when a woman approaches the police station and says, I want to register an FIR, she needs to understand that it's the beginning of a legal case, of a criminal case, because this FIR eventually makes its way to court, and it can result in punishment to the perpetrator. So if a wife says that my husband beats me, he's physically, mentally, verbally abusive, and I wish to register an FIR will be registered under section 498A of the Indian Penal Code. There is a process to register this FIR. But once the FIR is registered, it's a case against her husband, and the maximum punishment can be up to 3 years imprisonment. So when a woman approaches a police station, I think her agency, what she wants, is very critical. So there are some times that a woman will say, I just want to document the violence. I just want there to be some record that I have faced this violence. And therefore an NC, is the answer for her problem. But then there are cases where
Sorry, I think that's a really interesting point, because sometimes as a friend, as an ally, as a family member, you're angry on behalf of a victim and you want her to take the final decision. But we do have to remember, while being allies, that it's important to keep the woman and her agency at the center of the process. And Persis, I think what you're saying is wait for her readiness, wait for her to reach the point where she's actually able to do it, because there's no point in sort of moving ahead as an ally and leaving the victim and survivor behind.
Absolutely, because much to contrary belief, women don't rush to police stations and say, I want to register an FIR. Women are seeking assistance. They want the violence to stop. They're always looking for options. Generally the police station may not be her first port of call. She's tried to speak to him herself. There have been interventions with family members, relatives, friends, maybe a local organization, and when she comes to a police station, she needs to understand her options. And very often she thinks, oh, if I register an FIR, it is a case, so I don't want to go. But there is also an option to register an NC. At least the violence will be documented. Sometimes the perpetrator is made aware that an NC has been registered. That may act as a deterrent for future violence, right? So at every point of time, keeping her agency at the center of this intervention. And it's important to understand from a woman, do you want the husband to know that an NC has been filed? Do you want us to call him and tell him it has been filed? Do you just want to file it for record purposes? So at every point of time, communicating to her, what are all the options?
She does have the option of filing an NC, and the perpetrator is not informed at that moment. That is an option.
Yes, that is an option.
I think that's also right. So great. I think that's important, and things that a lot of people do not know about the law. And as you said, it is, I think, empowering and essential, actually, if you want to support a victim or a group that's struggling with domestic violence. So important to know that there is a system, there's a protective system. And I think perhaps important not to give up before anything and say, hey, this law doesn't work, but perhaps how do we use our voice, our privilege, and our compassion to listen to the victim, really respect her agency, and of course be an ally. Thanks so much, Persis, and we'll be back to chat more about more things that citizens can do.
Thank you, Suparna. Thank you.